I didn't grow up surrounded by towering skyscrapers, crowded streets, or the endless noise of a massive city. My childhood was different. I was raised in a place where nature was everywhere, where the horizon stretched farther than the eye could see, and where adventure was never more than a few steps away. While many people spent their free time inside shopping malls or crowded entertainment districts, I was lucky enough to have an entire world outside waiting to be explored. Hiking through quiet forests, camping beneath endless skies, and discovering hidden places became a normal part of my life. But out of all the outdoor activities my hometown offered, there was one thing that always felt special: being out on the water. Boating was something that seemed almost magical. The feeling of leaving the shore behind, watching the land slowly disappear, and entering a world surrounded only by waves and open sky was something I never got tired of. Of course, owning a boat was far beyond anything I could afford. But fortunately, my friend Trevor was one of the lucky ones. His family had always lived near the water, and boating had been a huge part of his life since he was young. They owned a decent-sized boat, and throughout our childhood, that boat became the center of countless memories. We spent entire days out there exploring the lake, swimming, fishing, and simply enjoying the freedom that came with being away from everything else. When Trevor finally got his boating license, his father trusted him enough to let us take the boat out on our own. That was when our real adventures began. During high school, Trevor and I discovered a small island hidden along one of the boating routes we often traveled. It wasn't marked as a tourist destination. It wasn't famous. It didn't have any signs, buildings, or anything that would make someone think it was special. But to us, it was our secret place. If I had to estimate the size of the island, I'd say it was roughly the size of a large Walmart parking lot, or maybe even a little bigger. Small enough to explore completely, but large enough to feel like we had stepped into another world. For years, that island became our escape. Throughout high school, college, and even into early adulthood, we kept coming back. Every visit felt like returning to a place that belonged only to us. Occasionally, we would see someone else fishing nearby or passing through the area, but most of the time, the island was completely empty. It felt like our own private island. At first, I assumed nobody came there because reaching it wasn't exactly convenient. There was no dock. There was nowhere to safely pull a boat onto shore. The island was surrounded by jagged rocks, steep cliffs, and thick trees that covered most of the land. The only way to get there was to anchor the boat offshore and swim the short distance to land. To some people that might sound annoying, but for us, it was part of the adventure. Over the years, we explored every corner of that island. We knew the paths, the hidden areas, and the places where the trees grew thicker. We even placed small markers in certain locations so we could navigate around more easily. When we were teenagers, the island became the ultimate place for huge games of manhunt. We would disappear into the trees, hide behind rocks, and chase each other through the darkness until exhaustion took over. As we got older, the island changed from a childhood playground into a place where we could escape the rules of everyday life. It became a place where we could stay up late, make noise, tell stories, and enjoy being young without worrying about anything else. But looking back now, there was always something strange about that island. Something I never paid much attention to until years later. There was almost no wildlife. And I mean almost nothing. No birds building nests in the trees. No squirrels running through branches. No small animals hiding in the brush. No reptiles crawling across the rocks. Even insects seemed strangely absent. For a place surrounded by water and covered with trees, it was almost unnatural how quiet it could become. Sometimes we joked about it. Whenever we brought someone new to the island, we would tell them ridiculous stories just to scare them. We would say the island was cursed. We would invent fake legends about strange things happening there. We would laugh as people looked around nervously pretending to believe us. But those stories were nothing more than jokes. I never actually believed there was anything unusual about the island. Not until one night. A night that changed the way I looked at that place forever. By that time, Trevor owned his own boat. One day, he suggested something none of us could believe we had never done before. He said, "Why don't we camp there overnight?" The idea immediately sounded incredible. He could fit 8 people on his boat, and we could spend the night on the island like we were explorers discovering some forgotten piece of land. Everyone loved the idea, especially because there was a girl named Megan in our friend group, and at the time there was definitely something developing between us. We liked each other, but we'd never really had the chance to spend much time alone together. A night away from everyone else sounded perfect. So that afternoon, we loaded the boat and left the dock behind. The sun was still high when we arrived at the island around 4 p.m. At first, everything was exactly how we imagined it would be. Amazing. We walked around the island showing Megan and the others all the places we had discovered over the years. We showed them the paths we used to run through as kids, the hidden areas where we used to hide, and all the little details that made the island special to us. As the sun slowly disappeared, we built a fire. The flames lit up the darkness as we cooked hot dogs, opened some drinks, and sat together sharing stories. At that point, it was honestly one of the best nights I had ever experienced there. The fire was warm. The sky was clear. Everyone was laughing. Trevor kept feeding the flames while we sat around the fire talking about old memories and enjoying the feeling of being completely isolated from the rest of the world. But several hours into the night, something changed. I noticed Megan wasn't acting like herself. Normally, she was one of the most energetic people in the group. She laughed constantly. She was always smiling, always joking, always involved in every conversation. But now she was quiet. Too quiet. She sat there staring toward the trees, almost like she was listening for something. At first, I thought she was just tired. But the longer I watched her, the more uncomfortable I became. I leaned closer and asked, "Are you okay?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she kept staring into the darkness. Her eyes moved slowly across the tree line, scanning the shadows between the branches. Finally, she said, "I keep hearing something." I asked what she meant. She told me there were noises coming from the woods, not random sounds. Movement, like something was walking through the trees. I tried to reassure her. I told her it was probably an animal. But then she reminded me of something we had joked about earlier. We've never seen any animals here. She was right. But I explained that we had also never stayed overnight before. Maybe there were creatures that only came out after dark. I expected that answer to calm her down. It didn't. She continued staring into the trees. Then she quietly said something that made everyone stop laughing. "I don't think it's an animal." For a moment, nobody said anything. I thought maybe she had just become overwhelmed by the darkness. Maybe the isolation was getting to her. But what bothered me was that she had barely touched her drink. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't acting irrational. She genuinely believed something was out there. Slowly, the mood around the fire changed. The joke stopped. The laughter faded. Everyone began looking toward the same dark line of trees. Trevor's girlfriend, Rosie, finally asked the question everyone was thinking. "Are we absolutely sure we're the only ones here?" Trevor and I looked at each other. We were certain. There was no other boat nearby. No lights. No signs of another person. Earlier that day, we had walked across the entire island. We would have noticed if someone else had been there. I was convinced the darkness was playing tricks on everyone's minds. The human brain does strange things when it's surrounded by complete silence and darkness. But once fear enters a group of people, it spreads quickly. No matter how much we tried to calm everyone down, the feeling wouldn't disappear. Finally, Trevor grabbed a flashlight. "Everyone relax," he said. "I'm going to prove there's nobody out there." He stood up and aimed the flashlight toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness. Slowly. Carefully. He moved it from one side of the tree line to the other. Everyone watched. Nobody spoke. The forest looked empty, silent, until suddenly, Megan screamed. A sharp, terrified scream that instantly sent chills through all of us. She pointed toward the trees. Everyone jumped, because whatever she had seen was standing exactly where the flashlight had stopped. Megan's scream cut through the night like a warning. She pointed directly toward the trees, her entire body frozen with fear. At first, none of us understood what she was seeing. Everyone stared into the darkness, trying to find whatever had terrified her. Then she whispered something that made the blood drain from my face. There are two people standing there. The strange thing was, nobody else had seen them. Not at first. We all looked toward the area she was pointing at, but the darkness swallowed everything. The trees stood silently in the distance, their branches moving slightly in the wind. Trevor didn't believe it. He slowly lifted the flashlight again and moved the beam back toward the same spot. And then, there they were. Two figures, standing perfectly still beside the trees. The image of those two people staring back at us is something I will never forget. Even now, years later, I can still picture it clearly. They weren't standing in the open. They were almost completely hidden among the shadows, which explained why we hadn't noticed them before. They blended into the darkness so well that they looked like they had been there the entire time, silently watching us, waiting. The moment Trevor realized what he was seeing, he instinctively stepped backward. The flashlight moved away. For a second, the beam left the figures. Then Trevor quickly raised it again and pointed back toward the trees. But they were gone. Completely gone. The spot where those two people had been standing was empty. No movement. No footsteps. Nothing. That was the moment the atmosphere changed from uncomfortable to terrifying. Because we all knew what we had seen. Two people had been standing there. And somehow, in the few seconds it took for the flashlight to move away and return, they disappeared. Trevor immediately started shouting toward the woods. "Hey, come out." His voice echoed through the trees. Nobody answered. No footsteps. No explanation. Only silence. Then, after a few moments, several of us made a decision that still seems ridiculous when I think back on it. We decided to walk toward them. Looking back now is probably one of the dumbest things we could have done. We had no idea who these people were, what they wanted, or how long they had been watching us. But at the time, fear mixed with adrenaline made us feel like we needed to prove we weren't afraid. We walked into the area where we had seen them. Nothing. Nobody. The woods were empty. But then we heard something. A sound coming from deeper in the trees. Laughter. Quiet. Faint. Almost like someone was trying not to be heard. That was enough for me. I looked at Trevor and told him we needed to leave. Whatever was happening, I didn't want to find out. I could tell Trevor's pride was taking a hit. This was his island. His boat. His idea. He didn't want to admit that something was wrong. But after a moment, he finally agreed. We stopped trying to investigate. We started gathering our things. We put out the fire. We packed only what was necessary. But the entire time, Megan kept looking toward the trees. Hurry up. She repeated it again and again. She said she could still hear them laughing. The worst part was that no matter where she pointed the flashlight, she couldn't find anyone. The woods remained empty, yet she could hear them. Eventually, we made our way back toward the water. The boat was waiting just offshore. The darkness around the island felt heavier than before. Every step toward the shoreline felt like we were being watched. Just as Trevor and I were about to reach the boat, Megan suddenly screamed again. This time, her voice was even more terrified. She pointed the flashlight toward the beach, and there they were. The two figures, standing on the shoreline. They weren't in the woods anymore. They were right there, close enough that we could see them clearly. I didn't think. I just jumped onto the boat. Trevor was right behind me. But as he grabbed the edge of the boat and prepared to climb in, the woman spoke. Trevor. Everything stopped. She knew his name. Trevor Froza. Slowly he turned around. The woman was standing on the beach, staring directly at him. Then she said something that still bothers me to this day. She told him she wanted him to come with her into the forest. She said she wanted to show him something interesting. Something cool. Then she said she would come back for the rest of us. The strangest part wasn't just what she said. It was Trevor's reaction. For a moment it was like his mind completely shut down. Like the only thing he could think about was walking back onto that island. He actually started moving toward her. Not running. Not resisting. Just calmly stepping back toward the shore. Almost like he was being pulled. I grabbed him. Hard, I grabbed his arm and pulled him back onto the boat. I practically threw him inside. And the most disturbing part, he didn't say anything. He didn't argue. He didn't even seem to realize what he had almost done. It was as if for those few seconds he wasn't fully himself. We pulled up the anchor as quickly as we could. Then we left. As the boat moved away from the island, Megan kept the flashlight aimed at the shore. The man was gone, but the woman remained. She stood there watching us, silent. Still, she didn't chase us. She didn't call out again. She simply watched. We kept the light on her until eventually she turned around and slowly disappeared back into the trees. Before we went too far, Trevor made one final circle around the island. He wanted to know if there was any possible explanation. Maybe another boat. Maybe a hidden dock. Maybe something we missed. But what we found made the situation even worse. There was nothing. No boat. No kayak. No sign of anyone arriving. Those two people had already been on the island when we got there, and we had no idea where they came from, or how long they had been there. The island was far enough from the mainland that swimming there would have been extremely difficult, especially at night. Especially for two people carrying nothing. The more I think about it, the less sense it makes. We had spent the entire afternoon walking around that island. We explored the trails. We searched through the trees. We were everywhere. There was nowhere obvious to hide. If two people had been there, we should have seen them. We should have heard them. But it was like they didn't arrive. It was like they appeared, out of nowhere. After that night, Trevor and I returned to the island only one more time. The next day we went back because we needed answers. We wanted proof that what happened had a normal explanation. We searched through the woods. A few feet from the shoreline, we found something strange leaning against a tree. At first we thought it was just a pile of branches. But the longer we looked at it, the more uncomfortable we became. It looked like a human figure, a shape made entirely from sticks, a rough outline of a person, standing there, waiting. Neither of us wanted to stay any longer. We got back on the boat and left. I still don't know what happened that night. I don't know who those two people were. I don't know how they got there. And I don't know why that woman knew Trevor's name. But I do know one thing. That island was never the same after that. Maybe there is a logical explanation. Maybe there is something we missed. but after experiencing it myself, I can confidently say that something about that place was wrong. I have no desire to return, not because I hate the island, actually the opposite. Some of my best memories were made there, but now whenever I think about that night, my mind goes to places I wish it wouldn't. I've told this story to several people over the years, hoping someone would laugh and tell me I was imagining things. That fear had taken over. That there was a simple explanation, but nobody ever does. Every person I tell eventually reaches the same uncomfortable conclusion. Something strange happened that night. Something we still don't understand. And some stories are terrifying not because of what we know, but because of what we never will. The afternoon started like any other ordinary day at the marina. The water was calm. The boats gently rocked against the docks. The entire place had that peaceful feeling that comes with being away from the noise of everyday life. Then, sometime in the afternoon, a boat I had never seen before slowly approached the marina. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about it. It looked like a normal boat. The kind of boat you would expect someone to use while traveling from one place to another. The owner had been assigned a transit slip, a temporary docking space given to boaters who are passing through and need somewhere to stay for a night or two. Coincidentally, the empty slip right beside mine was available, so that was where he parked. As he carefully maneuvered the boat toward the dock, I stepped out of my own boat to help him tie it down. That's just something people in the boating community often do. You help your neighbor. You grab a rope. You make sure nobody damages their boat. It's an unspoken courtesy, but before I could even reach the dock, the man suddenly shouted at me. He told me he didn't need my help. The tone wasn't friendly. It wasn't just someone politely declining assistance. It was harsh, almost offensive. For a moment I was caught off guard, but I didn't take it personally. Some people are protective of their boats. Some people prefer doing things alone. I understood that, so I stepped back and let him handle it. Once he finished securing the boat and tightening the ropes, I decided to introduce myself. I told him my name and said that if he needed anything during his stay, he could simply knock on my boat. The man looked directly at me, but there was almost no emotion on his face. No smile. No greeting. No simple acknowledgement. He just stared for a moment, then turned around and walked straight back onto his boat. I stood there watching him leave. I'm not someone who enjoys pointless conversations or forced small talk. I'm actually pretty quiet myself. But basic human interaction matters. If someone says hello, you say hello back. If someone offers help, you at least acknowledge it. The way he completely ignored me felt strange. Not rude in a normal way. More like he was intentionally keeping a distance. Like he didn't want anyone getting close. He disappeared down into the small cabin at the front of the boat. The vessel was just large enough to have a tiny walk-in cabin. I assumed there was probably only enough room for a small bed and a few personal belongings. Nothing more. Before I returned to my own boat, something suddenly caught my attention. A smell. At first I thought maybe it was coming from the marina. Maybe something had washed up nearby. Maybe a fish had been left somewhere. So I started looking around. But the longer I searched, the more certain I became. The smell was coming from his boat, and it was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't the normal smell of a fishing boat. It wasn't gasoline. It wasn't old equipment. It wasn't body odor. It was something much worse. A heavy, disgusting odor that seemed to hang in the air. The kind of smell that makes your stomach turn. The kind of smell your brain immediately tells you is wrong. I had no idea who this man was. He never gave me his name, but while he was docking, I noticed something sitting near the steering wheel. A coffee thermos. And written on it was a name. Buddy. So in my mind, that became the only way to identify him. About an hour passed. The marina returned to silence. Then suddenly I heard noises coming from his boat. At first it sounded like something had fallen. Then another sound. A heavier impact, like objects being knocked around. Then I heard glass break. I looked toward his boat. There was a small window on the side of the cabin, but it was completely covered. I couldn't see inside. I just stood there listening, trying to figure out what could possibly be happening. A few moments later, Buddy emerged from the cabin. He looked directly at me, just for a second. Then he turned away and walked down the dock toward the marina building. I assumed he was heading to the bathroom or shower area. That was actually the first time I got a proper look at him. He was a large man, around 6 feet tall. Heavy set? I would guess he was somewhere in his late 60s. Most of his head was bald with only a ring of white hair wrapping around the sides like a horseshoe. But the thing I noticed most was his glasses. They were thick, extremely thick. The lenses were so magnified that they seemed to cover half his face. They gave him a strange appearance, almost impossible to read. He disappeared into the marina building. 10 minutes passed, maybe less. But during that short time, I heard more sounds coming from his boat. Every few minutes, another bang, another movement, another muffled noise. I started wondering if maybe he had a dog inside, and that was the only explanation I could think of. Maybe his pet was moving around, knocking things over while he was gone. When Buddy returned, I decided to bring it up. I didn't want to accuse him of anything. I was just trying to be helpful. I told him I had heard some noises coming from his boat and asked if he had a dog. I explained that there was a large open field near the marina where he could let the dog walk around. He walked over to the back of my boat. Then he leaned down close to me, and in a low, flat voice he said, "I don't have a dog." He paused. Then he added, "It's only me." Those words bothered me more than I expected, because he didn't say them like someone simply answering a question. He said them like he wanted me to understand something, like he was correcting a misunderstanding. Then he turned around and walked back onto his boat. He disappeared into the cabin again. I sat there completely confused. If there was no dog, and he was truly alone, then what exactly had been moving around inside that boat? What had been making those sounds, and who or what was he talking to? After that, the boat became completely silent. The rest of the evening passed without anything major happening, but every once in a while when the wind shifted, that smell returned, a faint reminder that something about that boat wasn't right. Around 10:00 that night, I got ready for bed. I remember thinking about Buddy. After he had returned from the marina building, I never saw him again. Not once. He stayed inside that cabin for the entire night. At first, I didn't think much of it. Some people are private. Some people keep to themselves. But then, around 3:00 the morning, I woke up because I heard it again. The sounds coming from Buddy's boat. Except this time they were different. They weren't just random noises. They sounded like a struggle, something moving violently, something being forced. The boat creaked. Something hit the floor. There were muffled sounds coming from inside, and then I heard Buddy's voice, quiet, angry, almost like he was trying not to be heard. "Shut up," he said it again. "Shut up." The way he said it sent a chill through me. It wasn't the voice of someone calming down a pet. It wasn't someone talking casually. It sounded like someone trying to control a situation, trying to silence something. I listened carefully, waiting to hear another voice. A response. Anything. But I never heard another person, only that strange, muffled sound, only movement. Only Buddy repeatedly telling whatever was inside that boat to be quiet. And lying there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, I realized something that made my entire body tense up. Whatever was happening on that boat, Buddy didn't want anyone else to know. Then I heard him shout one word. Enough. The anger in his voice was unmistakable. And after that, silence. Complete silence. No more banging. No more movement. Nothing. I stayed awake for the rest of the night. I just lay there in my cabin, staring into the darkness, replaying every sound in my head over and over again. I tried to convince myself there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe I misunderstood what I heard. Maybe there was some kind of equipment moving around. Maybe there was something simple and harmless happening inside that boat. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The strangest part was that after that moment, Buddy was completely quiet. No more shouting. No more strange noises. No more movement. The boat beside me might as well have been empty. Then around 7:00 the next morning, I saw him finally leave. Buddy stepped out of his cabin carrying a duffel bag. He walked calmly down the dock toward the bathrooms, and the second I saw him disappear from sight, I made a decision I knew was probably a terrible idea. I needed to know. I needed to see if someone was actually inside that cabin, because if there was a person in trouble, I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. So I waited. I watched until Buddy was far enough away, until he was completely out of sight. Then I quietly stepped onto his boat. The moment my foot touched the deck, the smell hit me. It was overwhelming, much stronger than the day before. It was like stepping into a wall of something rotten and unnatural. My stomach turned instantly. Every instinct in my body told me that I shouldn't be there, but I forced myself forward. I walked toward the cabin door, and that was when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The door wasn't normal. It looked custom-made, stronger than a typical boat cabin door, and there was a heavy lock attached to it. That immediately made me uncomfortable. I stood there for a moment trying to decide what to do. Then I knocked. "Is anyone in there?" I asked. I was already preparing a lie in my head. I thought maybe I would say I was checking because I heard something, or maybe I was worried someone was hurt. I was trying to figure out what excuse I could use if Buddy suddenly appeared behind me, but nobody answered. At least, nobody answered with words. Instead, I heard it again. That sound. The same strange, muffled noise from the night before, except now I was standing only inches away from it. There was no wall of distance between us. No water. No dock. No uncertainty. It was coming from inside that cabin, and this time it was louder. Much louder. I knocked again. Is someone in there? The moment I asked, the sound changed. It became more intense, more desperate. Almost like whatever was inside was trying harder to be heard. Almost like it was responding to me. My heart started racing. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I was dealing with. And more importantly, I had no idea when Buddy was coming back. Suddenly, all I could think about was getting away. I stepped back, then I left. I hurried off his boat and rushed back to mine. The moment I got inside my cabin, I locked the door. I sat there staring at my phone. I thought about calling the police. I really did. But I didn't. And I know that sounds unbelievable. I know someone hearing this story might immediately say I would have called. But when you're actually standing in that moment, things are different. Your mind doesn't work as clearly as you imagine it would. You start questioning yourself. You start looking for another explanation. You tell yourself you're being paranoid. You convince yourself you're exaggerating. That's exactly what happened to me. I kept thinking, what if I'm wrong? What if there's a completely normal explanation? What if I ruined someone's life because I misunderstood something? Those thoughts kept running through my head. Then, while I was sitting there looking down at my phone, I felt something, like I was being watched. I looked up toward the window, and my entire body froze. Buddy was standing there, right outside my boat, looking directly at me. I jumped so hard I almost dropped my phone. He was just standing there, silent, expressionless, those thick glasses staring back at me. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He didn't gesture. He simply watched me. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then, without saying a word, he turned around and walked back toward his boat. I watched him carefully. He reached his cabin door, but before opening it, he stopped, just stood there. For a moment, it looked like he was thinking about something, almost like he knew I had been on his boat, almost like he was deciding what to do. Then he opened the door. A short time later, he started preparing to leave. He untied the boat, started the engine, and began pulling away from the dock. This time, I didn't offer to help. Not a chance. Whatever my first impression of him had been, it was nothing compared to what I felt now. I've met rude people before. I've met unpleasant people. I've met people who made me uncomfortable. But Buddy was different. There was something about him that triggered a feeling deep in my stomach. A warning. A feeling I had never experienced before. As I watched his boat disappear into the distance, I wondered if I would ever see him again. I never did. That happened years ago. And even now I still think about it. I try to tell myself that I overreacted, that my imagination filled in the blanks, that there was some ordinary explanation I failed to understand. But then another thought always comes back. What if I wasn't imagining it? What if there really was someone inside that boat? Someone trapped. Someone who needed help. And I was the only person close enough to do something. But I didn't. I grew up in an area where people didn't always get involved in their neighbors' problems. You could hear arguments through walls. You could hear people screaming at each other. Sometimes it sounded serious. Sometimes it sounded like something terrible was about to happen. But most of the time it wasn't. People learned to ignore things that weren't their business. And unfortunately, that's exactly what I did. I ignored it. I convinced myself it was nothing. I'm not someone who normally creates scary stories in my head. I'm usually the person looking for the logical explanation. But this is the one situation where I desperately hope my instincts were wrong. I hope Buddy wasn't the person I feared he might be. I hope there wasn't something horrible happening inside that boat. Because if there was, I may never know. I've never really believed in curses, legends, or old folklore. I've always considered myself someone who looks for facts and explanations. But something happened a few months ago that made me question whether there are still things in this world we don't understand. I'm sharing this because I genuinely want to know what other people think. Maybe there's a logical answer. Maybe there's something I missed. Or maybe some things are strange for a reason. A little over 3 months ago, I went fishing with my 2 friends, Dustin and Chris. Whenever the 3 of us happen to have the same day free, we take advantage of it and head out onto the water. It's something we've done many times. Usually we leave Dustin's house around sunrise, spend the morning fishing, and enjoy a quiet day away from everything. That day started exactly the same. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing suggested that anything strange was about to happen. About 30 minutes into our trip, I noticed Dustin quietly mumbling to himself. At first, Chris and I ignored it. Then we realized he was staring straight ahead. We asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer immediately. He just pointed toward the horizon. Far away, barely visible against the water, was a boat. From where we were sitting, Chris and I saw nothing unusual, just another boat. But Dustin noticed something small, something that became clearer the closer we got. The boat had an orange flag flying above it, and on that orange flag were 2 black symbols. At the time, I had no idea what it meant, but Dustin did. He told us it was a VDS flag, a visual distress signal, a signal used by boats in trouble. Normally, we would never approach another vessel like that, especially on such a huge body of water. But if someone was actually in danger, we had to help. As we got closer, Dustin slowed the boat down, and that was when we realized something was very wrong. Dustin slowed the boat as we approached the mysterious vessel. The closer we got, the stranger everything felt. The orange distress flag was still waving in the wind, clearly visible against the open water. Someone had raised it for a reason. Someone wanted to be found. Dustin turned his boat toward the larger vessel and shouted across the water, "Is everything okay over there?" His voice carried across the waves, but there was no response. Not a single word, no movement, no sign that anyone had heard him. As Dustin kept the boat steady, I stared at the other vessel, trying to spot someone on board. A person waving, someone injured, anyone. But from where we were, I couldn't see a single person. The boat itself was enormous compared to ours. Dustin later explained that it was technically a yacht, a small one by yacht standards, but still far larger than a simple fishing boat. It looked like the kind of vessel someone would spend days living on. Not just a boat, a floating home. Chris looked at both of us and asked the question we were all thinking. Should we just leave? For a moment, nobody answered. Because there were reasons to leave. The ocean is massive. Approaching a stranger's boat can be risky, especially when you have no idea what's happening. But there was also that flag, that orange signal, a distress call, a request for help. Dustin wasn't sure what the right decision was. I tried grabbing my phone to call for emergency assistance, but there was no signal, nothing. We were too far out. I looked back at the yacht. Something about it bothered me. Not because it looked dangerous, because it looked abandoned. I told Dustin I would jump over and check. He immediately didn't like the idea. He warned me that someone could be sick, injured, or in a fragile condition. What if an older person was inside and suddenly saw a stranger walking onto their boat? What if they panicked? What if something went horribly wrong? But to me, that was exactly why someone needed to check. If someone was unconscious or seriously hurt, every second mattered. I reminded him that I was CPR certified. If someone needed help, I could at least do something. After a few minutes of arguing, Dustin finally agreed. He brought the boat as close as he safely could. Then I prepared myself. I took one last look at the yacht. The orange flag continued moving in the wind, almost like it was silently calling me over. Then I jumped. I landed on the back of the yacht. The moment my feet touched the deck, I started shouting, "Hello, is anyone here? I am responding to your distress signal." I wanted to make it absolutely clear that I wasn't trespassing. I wanted whoever was inside to know I was there to help. The back of the yacht looked surprisingly comfortable. There were cushioned seats arranged around a table, the kind of setup designed for relaxing fishing and enjoying long days on the water. But what immediately caught my attention was that it looked like someone had been there moments earlier. Not hours, not days, minutes. 4 fishing rods were laid out, prepared and ready to be used. On the table sat 3 coffee mugs, and they weren't empty. Steam was still rising from them. That detail stopped me, because coffee doesn't stay hot forever. Someone had been sitting there recently, very recently. One of the seats had a nice Michigan State pullover jacket thrown across it, casually, like someone had taken it off and planned on putting it back on. Everything about the boat suggested life. People had been here. People were here. Or at least, they should have been. I slowly moved toward a large sliding door that was wide open. I kept calling out, "Is anyone injured? Can you hear me?" No answer. As I walked across the deck, I noticed something else. Footprints. Several muddy footprints scattered across the back area of the boat. Different sizes, different directions. At first that didn't seem unusual. It was a fishing boat. People get muddy. People walk around. That part made sense. But the problem was, there was nobody there. The evidence of people was everywhere, except the people themselves. I stepped inside, and the feeling changed instantly. The interior was a complete mess. Cabinets were open. Items were scattered across the floor. Things looked disturbed, not organized, not normal. Straight ahead was a small sleeping area built into a corner. Under normal circumstances, it probably would have felt cozy, a quiet little place to rest while traveling. But now it felt different. The bed was empty. The only things on it were pillows and blankets pushed into a messy pile against the wall. The last place I needed to check was the bathroom. The door was closed. I stood there for a moment. My heart started pounding. Not because I was afraid of ghosts or anything like that, but because I was preparing myself for the possibility that I was about to find someone inside, someone unconscious, someone injured, someone who desperately needed help. I slowly opened the door. Empty, just like the rest of the boat. The bathroom was completely empty. I let out a breath and turned around. I started walking back toward the sliding door, and that was when I saw movement. Out of the corner of my eye, something shifted. I turned around quickly and froze. The pillows on the bed were falling. The blanket was moving. For a second, my brain couldn't understand what I was seeing. Then the pile moved again, and an elderly woman slowly sat up. She was there the entire time, hidden beneath the blankets, watching, looking directly at me. I immediately raised my hands and tried to reassure her. "I'm here to help." I saw the distress flag, but she didn't react, not even slightly. She just stared at me, completely expressionless, emotionless, almost like she wasn't fully aware of what was happening. She barely looked alive. If I hadn't seen her move, if I hadn't watched her blink, I honestly would have thought she was dead. She was incredibly small. Her hair was braided neatly. Her skin was deeply tanned, almost with a rough texture like worn leather. But her eyes were the part I couldn't forget. She didn't look scared. She didn't look surprised. She simply stared. Not at me. Through me. It felt like she was looking at something beyond me. Something I couldn't see. I forced myself to stay calm. I told her that I was going back to my friends. I told her we were going to get help. Then I turned around and left. I moved as quickly as I could without panicking. I jumped back onto Dustin's boat. The moment I landed, I told them we needed to keep moving until we could get a signal. I explained everything. The woman hiding under the blankets. The strange condition she appeared to be in. The fact that she barely reacted to me. Dustin and Chris just stared at me, trying to process what I was saying. Then something happened that made all three of us go silent. The woman appeared. She stepped out through the sliding door. Slowly, almost mechanically, she walked toward the back of the yacht, toward the orange distress flag. None of us said a word. We just watched. She reached up, grabbed the flag, and slowly lowered it. The signal disappeared. Then, she took the flag in her hands, walked over to the table, and threw it underneath. After that, she calmly turned around and disappeared back inside. We sat there completely confused. The distress signal was gone. The woman clearly didn't want anyone coming. But one thing was obvious to me. Something was wrong. That woman didn't look like someone who had simply changed her mind about needing help. She looked like someone who needed help, whether she realized it or not. The more I looked at that woman, the more certain I became of one thing. She needed help. Whatever was happening on that boat, something was not right. Dustin seemed to realize the same thing. He didn't question it anymore. He started the engine and turned the boat around, heading back in the direction we had come from. Our only goal was to get far enough away to regain phone service and call for help. For several minutes, nobody said much. We were all trying to process what had just happened. The orange distress flag, the empty yacht, the hot coffee sitting on the table, the muddy footprints, the woman hiding under the blankets. Everything about it felt impossible. When my phone finally showed a signal, I immediately called the authorities. I explained everything. I told them about the yacht. I told them about the distress flag. I told them there was an elderly woman alone on board who appeared to be in some kind of condition where she needed assistance. The person on the other end listened carefully. Even though there were many strange details that didn't seem to add up, they said they would send someone to investigate. At that point, we had no idea how long it would take for help to arrive. So we made a decision. We turned around and headed back toward the location where we had seen the yacht. If the woman was truly in trouble, we didn't want to leave her alone. But when we reached the area, the yacht was gone. Completely gone. The water around us was empty. No boat. No orange flag. Nothing. We looked in every direction, but we had no idea which way she had gone. The open water stretched endlessly around us, and without knowing her heading, there was no way for us to follow. The entire morning had been ruined. We never even got to fish. After everything that happened, none of us had the mindset to continue like nothing had happened. We were too shaken. So we went back to Dustin's house and spent the rest of the day trying to make sense of what we had experienced. The strangest part, we never heard anything from the police. No update. No explanation. Nothing. I don't know if they ever found the yacht. I don't know if they investigated and simply didn't tell us. Or maybe when they arrived there was nothing there and they assumed it was a false alarm. I have no idea. But I do know this. Something happened that morning. Something I still cannot explain. Because when I put all the pieces together, the conclusion my mind reaches is disturbing. That woman called us. She used the distress flag to attract attention. She wanted someone to come to that boat. But the moment I stepped onto it, she lowered the flag. She hid it. And she never said a single word. Not one. That is the part that bothers me the most. Why call for help if she didn't want help? Why hide the signal after someone finally arrived? Why was she hiding beneath those blankets? And most importantly, who had been on that boat before us? Because there was evidence everywhere. The fishing rods, the muddy footprints, the jacket, the 3 coffee mugs still warm from the steam rising above them. Someone had been there. Recently. Very recently. But when I searched the boat, there was only one person. That small, fragile-looking woman. That is what makes the entire thing so unsettling. The boat looked like it belonged to a group of people, but she was the only person there. Some of my friends jokingly say I was cursed after stepping onto that yacht, and I understand why they say that. Because after that day, my life seemed to take a strange turn. A streak of terrible luck followed. I lost my job. My car broke down. One problem seemed to appear after another. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing impossible. Just a constant chain of unfortunate events. Bad timing. Bad luck. One thing after another. Dustin's elderly father even told us an old story about a supposed curse connected to the water. A legend about people who encounter something strange on the ocean and bring misfortune back with them. But I don't believe that. I don't believe in curses. I think blaming some supernatural force is just an easy way to explain random bad events. Sometimes life simply goes wrong. Sometimes bad things happen for no reason. And sometimes our minds try to connect things that aren't actually connected. But still, I can't forget that morning. Because no matter how much I try to explain it logically, there are details that continue to bother me. I know what I saw. I was there. I stepped onto that boat. I walked through every room. I saw the empty cabin. I saw the evidence that someone had recently been there. And I saw that woman, alone, silent, watching me. I don't know who she was. I don't know what happened before we arrived. I don't know if there was a terrible secret hidden on that yacht, or if everything has a completely normal explanation that I simply haven't discovered yet. Maybe she was just a confused elderly woman. Maybe the other people left before we arrived. Maybe there is nothing mysterious about it at all. Or maybe that morning we answered a distress signal that we were never supposed to find. I'm sharing this story because I genuinely want to know what others think. Was it just a strange coincidence? Was there something much darker happening on that boat before we arrived? Did that woman need saving? Or did we accidentally become part of something we were never meant to witness? Because sometimes the most frightening experiences are not the ones where you see something impossible. They're the ones where everything seems almost normal, except for the few details that make absolutely no sense.